Hi, Rosie. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. It's a real honor and privilege. So, Rosie, you have many years' experience in IP in the United Kingdom. How is this current COVID-19 situation impacting the IP sector in general, and which are the major changes you've seen in the last few months?
Sure. So, obviously, the IP world has been affected in pretty much the same way that everyone else has. There's been a combination of people moving to remote working, a lot of disruption in terms of the financial side of things, with clients maybe changing the way in which they pay their invoices, and less work, at least initially, coming through the front door. The What's been really interesting has been seeing how the wider IP community, as far as the courts are concerned, have adapted. So virtual hearings are now becoming increasingly common, both at the registry level and in the courts. So I had a virtual case management hearing a few weeks ago, and it's not ideal, but it works. It works a lot better than backing up the whole system with waiting for things to come through for a long time. And I think it's fair to say that although maybe not everybody adapted immediately, people are getting used to having virtual meetings, virtual mediations, a lot more virtual business development as well. I suppose I tried to recreate Inter a little bit by having a number of video calls with people around the world, the people that I would have met with in person if we'd been able to go to Singapore. So that's been really good. I think sort of longer term, there might be some big advantages that come out of this, as far as certainly virtual hearings are concerned. It's forced the UK IPO used to insist on having faxes for certain documents. That thankfully is not possible in the COVID era, and they have discovered that email is perfectly adequate for this, and hopefully that approach will continue. Other sort of advantages have been, I think people have settled a lot more, partly because of the financial situation and partly because the prospect of a virtual hearing isn't something that anyone's particularly keen on. So that has generally encouraged a lot more settlements to happen, which is obviously in everyone's interest from a certainty point of view, and obviously a cost point of view as well.
How long would you say that there was a lag in the London, the UK patent offices until they were able to adjust? Like, how long was it shut down?
So there was no shutdown. Actually, the UK IPO is based out of Wales, and in a town called Newport. A lot of their staff work from home anyway, so, or at least regularly do home working. So they did have the setup at home. They've also used a video link for a lot of hearings for a long time. So although the Zoom or Teams calls is slightly different to the video link, which is much more like a dedicated room with all of the conferencing facilities set up, it hasn't been so challenging to move it over. I think, like I say, there's things like the faxes and that more paper administrative side has taken a little bit longer to set up. And there have been a few sort of hiccups with things like they extended the period of time using this concept of interrupted days whilst the lockdown is continuing. But there are some features that, just because of the way that the software was baked in from the start, it wasn't possible to necessarily change the time period. So these are things like a notice of threatened opposition is done through the site, and you file what's called a TM7A form. But it just wasn't possible to extend this past the 2-month period. That may well have been resolved now. I haven't had to test it, because I generally have advised clients to just follow the old rules as much as possible and just assume that the timelines remain. But there have been a few issues like that. The court hearing that I referred to earlier, it was sent to, they didn't use my correct email address or my paralegal's correct email address. Thankfully, they used our barrister's correct email, so we did at least find out about it. But that's the sort of technical problem that was happening even after 6 weeks or so.
So Rosie, what would you suspect from the offices moving forward? Like, would you suspect that this is going to be more electronic approach? Like, do you see any technologies coming out to assist the court systems?
So registry-wise, I think we definitely are going to see much more of a movement towards, I would hope, the UK IPO adapting at least some of the features of the EU IPO registry, so that they have a dedicated portal where you can check in and see the status of every trademark application, opposition, invalidity action, etc. And it enables you to easily access all of the relevant documents, see any letters that have been sent, at a glance, because it's all stored there. And I think it's fair to say that the UK IPO has been scaling up its digital side of things simply because of Brexit and the impact that that is going to have. And certainly as far as the UK is concerned, Brexit is the sort of thing that's hovering in the background. So right the way through the COVID situation, we're also worrying about the fundamental changes to our constitution and in particular the impact that that's going to have on IP, which has been one of the more, to use the EU term, harmonised, which essentially means consistently consistent on uniform approaches to law across the EU. So, for example, the EU trademark is going to be converted into comparable trademarks, which will apply in the UK and the remainder of the EU. So there's going to be a separate trademark that's created, which will cover the UK only, following the date that the UK leaves, formally leaves the European Union. Because although we voted on Brexit and it will happen, the time period for it happening is not yet clear. At the moment, it's set to be the 31st of December, but it's possible that that could get extended. But in any event, it's meant that the UK IPO has been having to think quite carefully and scale up to enable this influx of trademarks to be dealt with efficiently.
So as an intellectual property partner at Gunnercooke LLP, you work across various industries and technologies. Do you see the current situation having a financial impact on certain technologies over others? And if you would say, what would you say would be more noticeable in some industries over others?
So I think it's already fair to say that some industries have been much more impacted than others. That's evident both in terms of like basic common sense when you look at the fact that, say, restaurants can't open, events can't happen. A lot of people aren't able to go shopping beyond sort of basic goods like food and medicines and that sort of thing. So a lot of retail has been severely impacted. The areas where there's been probably more growth have been areas like gaming and certain types of technology. I think probably larger scale business investments in technology are perhaps those projects being revisited, but more consumer technology. I mean, obviously Zoom is doing extremely well out of all of this, but there are plenty of other examples of companies that have been able to take advantage of the coronavirus. But even ones that look like they're obvious winners, like Amazon, have often quite large, large scale problems that they're having to deal with, like staff shortages, staff sickness, and issues to do with, potentially a wide number of other businesses within their portfolio. So even if one area is doing well, that doesn't mean that the business as a whole is always succeeding. I mean, for example, some clients have quite a large events arm within what might look to the outside world like a predominantly technology business, and that can have quite a big impact on the overall success of the company. So it's quite a challenging time. I think there will be definite winners in the longer term, but it's quite hard to say exactly how it will play out right now. I mean, some areas like entertainment have been doing extremely well with their older content, but obviously it's not possible to create high quality new content at the moment. So will be a gap in the future, and how that plays out will be quite fascinating to see.
In 2019, you were recognized as one of the 20 women in IP from around the world who are destined for great things. What are the challenges and opportunities this current situation presents to gender equality in IP?
So it was a real honor to be recognized in that way, and I was really, really pleased because it followed on from a lot of hard work that I've been putting in, particularly around my book and founding my IP practice at Gunnercooke. So I think, it takes a lot to sort of make it anywhere, regardless of your gender. I don't have children, so it's a little bit hard for me to comment on some of the impacts as far as women are concerned, because certainly anecdotally it seems that one of the big problems with the virus, or sort of one of the big flashpoints, I suppose, is that women are taking on more responsibility for the homeschooling and housework and that side of things. Because I live alone, I take on 100% of that responsibility, but I don't have a child that I'm responsible for homeschooling. So I'm in, quite a fortunate position to be in. But at the same time, I can't really speak to the longer term impact beyond saying that I think it's fair to say that a lot of the perception around women's equality in the workplace not necessarily being at parity is well founded, and although there have been steps to improve that over time, I sincerely hope that this isn't an example of something that's going to set things back, and that if anything, the move towards home working will mean that once the schools reopen and children are able to return, actually this could be quite a beneficial thing for women in the longer term, because it's become a lot more acceptable to work from home, and there's a lot more of a realization that it's not having a day off, that it really is equivalent to and often harder work than going into an office.
If you had 30 seconds or less to tell there's many young women out there that are moving up in the IP world, looking up to someone like you who's experienced, seasoned in the industry, what would you tell them in 30 seconds or less about what they should expect, how they should position themselves to be successful in this industry?
So, the best thing about intellectual property is that, I love it. It's great, a great area with great clients, really interesting technical problems, really interesting sort of strategic planning that needs to happen. And I would say that the best skill that you can have in being an IP lawyer is a willingness to learn, both about the law, but more fundamentally about the clients and the industries, so that you can frame the advice in a really practical and helpful way. And I think I had some really great role models early on in my career who showed me that that was really important. And it's all very well being the best technical lawyer, but if you can't think in terms of budgets and timeframes and priorities, then giving a long legal note is not actually that helpful for most clients. It's got to be much more tailored towards the realities of modern business. And I think the sooner that you start thinking in that way and reading trade magazines or magazines that are going to have relevant information to do with whatever sector it is, not, they can be consumer facing, but just giving you that extra insight, I think that's super, super helpful. And generally, even if people don't get back to you, I would say most professionals are pretty welcoming and pretty willing to give their time and attention if they possibly can. And certainly there are lots and lots of free resources out there, both videos, but also lots of newsletters and that sort of thing. And the more you keep on top of that, the better.
So I actually have a friend in the UK that some of them have the experience, but in order to be able to be totally licensed, they need to work under somebody to get the total qualifications to practice on their own. Is that something that you'd be able to maybe give someone advice on how to get into this market and how to find those connections in order to be able to get qualified?
So the UK system, I would say the best place to find out more about the UK system and how to become qualified is via the Law Society website, which regulates or is connected to the regulator, which is the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and together they, between the two websites, there will be some very helpful information about the process and the costs. Because in order to become a qualified lawyer, you first need to have a UK or an equivalent law degree. There are courses that can be done if you're foreign qualified to sort of bridge that gap. And certainly if you don't have if you're not a qualified lawyer somewhere else, you've simply got a degree from another country, then you would need to do what we call a training contract, which is what you were describing. And that is essentially a 2-year period of time where it's paid employment, but it's sort of, I guess, like being a senior paralegal in some respects. So you are responsible for doing a mixture of relatively junior sort of menial work. I mean, thankfully, I suspect post-coronavirus, people won't have to learn the intricacies of how a photocopier works, which is something I became very familiar with early on. But it's a really great time to get to know different practice areas. Typically, you work in 4 seats of 6 months, and there's an opportunity to work with at least 4 different lawyers from across the law firm, and ideally get to know quite a large number of peers. The competition for training contracts has been extremely high for years and will no doubt only get more challenging, particularly as I think, again, anecdotally, quite a lot of firms have been postponing their training contract start times. Normally there's intakes in September and March, but I think they're certainly pushing back some of the September intakes. And also a lot of the recruitment process for that happened over the summer, but again, I'm assuming that they have all been cancelled. I think certainly from the point of view of a partner, it's great to have a trainee, but it's also a huge amount of time and investment, and it's not something that you can do lightly. So it's quite difficult for a single partner practice, or where there's quite a small number of partners to take on a trainee. Generally, that would only happen if the paralegal had been working with them for a very long time and they wanted to help them to get up to the next level. But you sort of, you'd have to really make a good business case for that being a possibility. And I think that's probably good advice generally on the recruitment side of things, is to sort of try and put yourself in the shoes of the business and think less about how it's your qualifications that would be helpful, but more about what their business objectives are and how your experience. It doesn't need to be legal experience even, you know, working in retail is a really valuable experience as well, but possibly more so than some courses that you get at university. So thinking in those sorts of terms, I think is really helpful.
So many of the foreign associates around the world rely on UK innovation patents around the world in order to file in their countries during national phase. What would you say moving forward? What should they be expecting after this COVID-19 situation?
So I'm not involved in patent prosecution, although I do patent litigation. So I can't talk in huge amounts of detail about the way in which the patent filings are going, but I certainly do think that innovation, investment in technology is a major government priority, because obviously both in terms of the virus and more significantly as far as the UK is concerned, Brexit, we as a country need to invest a lot more in R&D in order to remain competitive on a global stage. And I mean, I've been very proud to see the developments that have been happening out of Oxford University on the vaccine side of things, and I'm quite positive about the opportunities in our life sciences sector in the longer term, although in the short term, we the European Medical Agency used to be in the UK, so there are some losses that are going to take some time for us to kind of rebound from. But yeah, on those sorts of more general technology and innovation side of things, there's no indication that that will decrease. But obviously with social distancing, I suppose some things are going to take perhaps a little bit longer to develop than they might otherwise have done. But I don't see that happening on a greater or lesser trajectory than anywhere else in the world.